Welcome, digital wanderers, to the only history lesson that won't make you wish for a nap. Today, we are diving headfirst into the chaotic, messy, and frankly absurd relationship between the United States of America and Venezuela. It is a tale of two nations, one addicted to freedom and oil, and the other sitting on an ocean of oil, but currently out of order. This isn't your textbook history. This is a journey through the virtual world of bad decisions, economic implosions, and diplomatic tantrums. We are talking about a geopolitical soap opera that has been running for decades with no season finale in sight. So grab your popcorn, or perhaps an arepa if you can find the flour, because we are about to dissect how two best friends became the bitterest of frenemies. The story involves billionaires, bus drivers, ghost whisperers, and enough inflation to make your calculator cry. Let's set the stage. On one side, we have Uncle Sam, the global policeman who occasionally forgets his badge but never forgets his wallet. On the other side, we have Venezuela, a nation blessed by nature with the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, yet somehow cursed by management that treats economics like a suggestion rather than a science. It is a classic story of it's complicated. For most of the 20th century, these two were tight, like high school sweetheart tight. The US was thirsty for oil, and Venezuela was more than happy to be the bartender. It was a golden age of petrodollars, imported whiskey, and Miami shopping sprees. But as we all know, all good parties must come to an end, usually when someone decides to flip the table. In this case, the table flipping began in the late 90s, and the plates are still smashing today. To understand the beef, you have to understand the main course: oil. Black gold, Texas tea, dinosaur juice. Whatever you want to call it, it is the lifeblood of this toxic relationship. Venezuela didn't just have some oil, they had all of it. In the early days, American companies were practically living in Venezuela's backyard, drilling holes and pumping cash. Venezuela was the richest country in South America. They had the Concorde flying to Caracas. It was a time of excess where the ice in your drink was probably imported. But beneath the surface, inequality was brewing like a bad stomachache. While the elite were buying condos in Florida, the poor were wondering why the trickle-down economics felt more like a leaky faucet. This disparity set the perfect stage for a charismatic figure to enter, stage left, and completely rewrite the script.
Enter Hugo Chávez. In 1998, he swept into power with a red beret and a microphone he seemingly never turned off. Chávez wasn't just a president, he was a content creator before YouTube existed. He looked at the US influence and said, "No thanks." Actually, he said much worse things, often involving sulfur references and insults about hygiene. He branded the US as the empire, the great villain in his narrative of 21st century socialism. And just like that, the bromance was over. The US, used to having a friendly gas station to the south, suddenly found itself being lectured by its supplier. It was awkward. Chávez nationalized industries, kicked out foreign companies, and used oil money to fund social programs, which was great when oil was $100 a barrel. It was less great when he started picking fights with the biggest economy in the world while relying on them to buy his only product. The irony was thick enough to cut with a machete. Then came the devil's speech. Who could forget Chávez standing at the UN podium, sniffing the air and declaring that it smelled like sulfur because George W. Bush had been there the day before? It was peak theater. The world laughed, the US rolled its eyes, and diplomatic relations took a nosedive straight into the pavement. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was personal. The US responded in the most American way possible: sanctions. If Venezuela wanted to play hardball, the US was going to bring a sledgehammer. But here is the sarcasm of it all. Despite the insults, the shouting, and the threats, the US was still buying Venezuelan oil. They were funding the very revolution they claimed to hate. It's like buying a subscription to a channel just to leave hate comments. The codependency was real, and it was toxic. Fast forward to the transition of power. Chávez passes away, and the mantle is picked up by Nicolas Maduro. Now, if Chávez was the charismatic lead actor, Maduro was the understudy who didn't quite memorize the lines. A former bus driver, Maduro inherited a country that was already starting to wobble. Oil prices crashed. The one thing keeping the party lights on suddenly dimmed. And what did the government do? Did they diversify? Did they tighten their belts? No. They printed money. They printed so much money that the currency became less valuable than the paper it was printed on. We are talking about hyperinflation, where a cup of coffee costs 1,000,000 bolivars. People started using cash to weave handbags because it was cheaper than buying fabric. It was an economic experiment gone horribly wrong. And the US watched from the sidelines, probably eating popcorn while adding more sanctions to the fire. The situation got so absurd that Venezuela essentially had two presidents for a while. You had Maduro, sitting in the palace, and Juan Guaido, recognized by the US and 50 other countries, sitting, well, mostly on Twitter. It was a glitch in the simulation. The US seized Venezuelan assets, blocked oil sales, and tried to squeeze the regime out. But sanctions are a tricky weapon. They often miss the target and hit the civilians instead. While the leadership continued to eat well, the average Venezuelan was on the Maduro diet, losing weight involuntarily because there was no food. The shelves were empty, the hospitals had no medicine, and millions of people fled the country. It was a humanitarian crisis wrapped in a political stalemate, served with a side of geopolitical incompetence from all parties involved. But let's not ignore the cultural weirdness. Despite the hatred, Venezuela is arguably the most Americanized country in South America. They love baseball more than soccer. They are obsessed with beauty pageants, just like Donald Trump. They love American movies, American music, and American fast food. It's a love-hate relationship where the culture meshes perfectly, even if the governments are trying to strangle each other. You have Venezuelan immigrants in Miami transforming neighborhoods, bringing their arepas and their grievances, creating a little Venezuela that is staunchly anti-socialist. Meanwhile, back in Caracas, the government blasts anti-imperialist propaganda while wearing Nike sneakers and using iPhones. The cognitive dissonance is deafening. Looking at the modern day, the saga continues. The US has realized that maybe, just maybe, they need Venezuelan oil again because global politics is a messy game of musical chairs. With conflicts elsewhere in the world, suddenly the dictator in Caracas doesn't look quite as bad as the other guys. We are seeing a tentative thawing, an awkward shuffling of feet. Representatives are meeting, whispers of easing sanctions are floating in the air. It proves that in geopolitics, there are no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. And usually, that interest is flammable liquid found underground. The moral high ground is often abandoned the moment gas prices go up at the pump.
So, what is the conclusion of this digital journey? The US-Venezuela conflict is a masterclass in how not to manage a relationship. It is a story of squandered potential, ego-driven diplomacy, and the tragic reality that regular people always pay the price for the tantrums of the powerful. It's funny in a dark, twisted way, like watching a car crash in slow motion where the drivers are clowns. As we look to the future, maybe the new generation, the Gen Z of both nations, will realize that fighting over 20th century ideologies in a 21st century world is cringe. Maybe they will bond over memes, crypto, and a shared desire not to be broke. Until then, we remain trapped in this loop of sanctions and speeches, watching the world's weirdest sitcom replay the same episode over and over again.